Welcome to GPJFF in Conversation. My name is Rabbi Moskowitz. My pronouns are he, him. I am the scholar in residence for trans and queer Jewish studies at Congregation Beit Simchat, which is the world's largest LGBT synagogue, and I work in allyship and advocacy. I first just want to thank you both for being available for this and also for producing this film. It is deeply moving and stirring. It's educational and I think it's very passionate, and it speaks to narrowing the proximity that many people who don't yet have access to the awareness that people in their communities and families of trans experience. It gives them really an up-close look at some of the struggles and the obstacles and the deep heart that accompanies this journey. So the first question I have is, how are things in Israel right now? Where has there been progress, and what are the boundaries of the places that need the most work right now for trans inclusivity?
Well, trans community in Israel got stronger in the past years because we get more Hilla, can you help me with that?
Yeah, there is more representation. And I feel that, TRANSKIDS was part of this process of putting the story and exposing the stories of transgender on the screen in Israel.
Yeah, so you can't really accept something if you don't know what it is. So recently people really started to see us everywhere and get to know us for who we are more than what we are. And I think that the next step will probably be being more equal in where we don't need to explain ourselves every time. And I feel that every place I go, I need to put it on the table, hey, I'm Noam and I'm trans. And I think that I hope that in a few years I won't have to do it anymore.
And I'll just add that actually, because I feel that in Israel there was when we started to work on the film, there was definitely no representation of transgender youth on the screen, but even not youth, it was very limiting, and it took us very long time to film over the course of 4 years. So over those years, there was a little bit more. When we started, there was only Dana International, the famous singer, and now, suddenly there is, a transgender person on a reality show, and so there is slowly more and more. But obviously, I feel that we're in the process, and hopefully we'll continue this process because, as Noam said, it's very important as a tool and as a step for equality.
The movie is not just an Israeli film, it's a very Jewish film. And I'm curious, in what ways have you found Judaism to be supportive, affirming, validating of your gender identity? And are there any places of tension where you feel like there might be some sort of conflict?
Well, there is a conflict between both communities, the religious one, Judaism, and the LGBTQ plus community. Because I think that there is a lot of past tension, because if someone was rejected by his or her community, then they take this tension and they take this experience into what they think about Judaism in general. So there is this tension, but after coming out, I learned so much about how this community, the religious community, can support you. And I mean, when I came out, the first thing, even before my non-religious friends got to know what it is and accept me, the rabbi of my community called my parents and told them if he want to go to the synagogue, he can, and he have a place near his dad. And it really made me feel like I have this place. So having this support before coming out to everyone outside my community, it was really amazing and helped me through this transition in the beginning.
And I would love to add also, because often when people see the film, they react to this very first scene with Noam and his family, and some people have very strong emotion about because Noam's father say very strong things there, but I wanted to point out two things. First of all, that really Noam and Noam's family are incredible supportive, and I feel that each of us come from a slightly different background, values, beliefs, and I think that to me their support is incredible, and you can see it in the film, and you can see the process that they went through, and to me, every person with this whole thing that they bring, have a different way of looking, and it doesn't really matter for me how they reason their support and how they really frame this support within their sets of belief, as long as they support you and they love and they allow him to be who he is. I think that's incredible. And you can see also that the transition that at the beginning, Noam's parents didn't know what transgender is, and at the end of the film there, towards the end, they go with Noam to parades and to to protest, and they're a big supporter of course of Noam and the community in general.
That's fantastic. One of the things that's really also on display is the intergenerational tension, the way in which so many of the grandparents had like a different kind of just perspective. And when we think about gender identity, it's hard to separate that from gender roles, and the roles of different genders and different generations have simply evolved, right? And especially at the intersection of gender identity and sexual orientation, you see that in terms of older lesbians as opposed to, and it's actually really interesting when we think about the way in which society kind of separates out the construction and the essential parts of gender. But I'm curious, in terms of the practical, what have you found to be successful in trying to give language to those people who perhaps were raised in a world with zero awareness of any sort of trans experience? How have you found the words to be able to let them know that it's real, it's perhaps always existed, and to give them some sort of access to it?
It was very difficult at the beginning because I was feeling kind of uncomfortable to share this part of my life that was hidden up until this point. And first, when I came out, I didn't share much, and my parents, they didn't know how to handle it, and like they couldn't understand me because I didn't tell them what I want them to understand. And once I got this and I realized that if I won't explain to them, they won't know, then I really started to let them know about everything, what I want, how I feel. I told them about organizations and sites they can go to and learn and educate themselves. And once they did it, like we had the shared language about it. Like when I said transitions, they know what I was talking about. And once we did that, the communication was like so much better, and we can really understand each other now.
I mean, I'm not, I'm a filmmaker, but I did spend, all these years with these for youth. And what's interesting that I found, which again, I don't know if it's really everywhere, that sometimes for the grandparents, it was in a way easier for them to accept than to their parents. And obviously, all four families that I filmed were family who accept their kids, because otherwise they would not. I mean, I met some families that did not let me shoot because they weren't fully accepting. But even within the most accepting family, like I remember, for example, Free's mother, when I filmed them when they went for the first time to get the hormones. And with all the exception, it was so difficult for Free's mother. He said, maybe I'm doing a mistake, and maybe I'm gonna give him these hormones that might, harm him down the line. And it was incredible to see that the grandparents, even though they are, further away and grew up with probably no understanding at all, in all the four cases, in our film, it was easier and maybe quicker for them to accept it than to the parents. And I find it very fascinating. Again, I don't know if it's scientific, but at least in our case, it was very evident.
It is so interesting how proximity to something changes your perspective. As a proof text, Joseph and Yosef, the brothers saw him from afar and wanted to do harm. But then, when he comes closer, right, there's a way in which they're able to resolve the differences through communication and of shared experiences. No experience is ever really contained in language, because language is just more limited than the experiences that we have. Hebrew, unlike English, is gendered. And I'm curious, as we look for language and words to try to describe, in America, they talk about being assigned female, and then the person realized that they were, and in Hebrew, you have similar things. The person's about tshuva, right? They've come to this recognition of a return to a place where the converts, the Gersh and his Geyer, the convert who converted, they were always somehow connected. And I think it kind of parallels the trans experience. Have you found, what have you found has been like the challenges of a gendered language? And are there examples where Hebrew, because the Hebrew in the film was really beautiful, the way the doctor says to the grandmother, you don't understand, his soul is masculine and he has a male neshama. And like that spoke. And so like you can like be supportive and be close, or if it doesn't feel comfortable, you can distance yourself. But so I'm curious how you see Hebrew as being both supportive and challenging.
Hebrew is very challenging. And I remember myself when I was like 9 or 10 years old, studying very hard English just to like being able to think in English to avoid being a female in my head. And so I think it is very challenging, but we have like so many ways to avoid using pronouns in our writings. So I personally prefer to use this option, but I think that we can like adjust the language, and there are so many options that people suggest every single year. There are new options, and people just need to find that one thing that fits them and use it and make it so much easier for so many people.
I have a small anecdote also with Ofri. So when I start filming Ofri, his mother used to still refer to him in a feminine voice. So I would call him, and I would call her, the mother. I got confused with the gender in my head too. No, I'm just joking. But I would call Matik, Ofri's mother, and I will ask her, so how is he doing? And she would answer me, she's doing great. And it was very confusing. Imagine, like the whole conversation, I'm referring to him as a male, and she referred to him in a feminine voice, and it was so confusing. And what was incredible in Freeze handling the situation, I had a lot of conversation with him of, isn't that really difficult for you? And he used to tell me, look, she needs the time, and I know it's a process, and eventually it will happen. And it did happen. I mean, very symbolically within the process, I think the surgery was in a way for her kind of the rebirth. But obviously it was a process, and it was really interesting to, and very challenging and confusing to me. And I think also when, I see someone that I'm not sure what gender they are, it's always like, okay, so should I say a boy, a male voice, or a female? It's very, so I kind of wish it was without gender.
In theological spaces, I think a lot about, de-gendering God, or seeing God as the source of all gender, right? We're created in the image
Female,
of God.
sure.
She. It's for sure not just he. That I think we could agree on. It is interesting that the one person who's created in the image of God is the one person before the split into the binaries. And even there in Genesis chapter 1, God uses plural pronouns for that one person. So it is always kind of interesting to think about how much of this is us just reacting. Like clearly it's the homophobia and the transphobia that provides, right, the resistance as opposed to a real tradition within our texts. As somebody who's straight and cis, I'm really always curious about how to affect, you know, systemic change. That it's one thing to be supportive to individuals who are in a position to be resourced to support, but when we think about kind of changing the world, I'm always curious what people have found to be successful and not. So in terms of the space of allyship, this work, this film, I think gives a certain kind of insight to people that makes it so much more human, which combats the dehumanization and the marginalization and the oppression and all of those things. You know, for people who want to be helpful, Noam, like what's the ask of the universe? If you could kind of give some language to a person who says, listen, I've never met somebody personally that I know is trans, but would love to like create safe spaces and learn more about it. Like, so what's the ask?
If you want to show that you're supportive, just ask for the pronouns right away. Like you see someone, ask, hey, what's your pronouns? And then immediately, if you ask me, I'll feel like, hey, there's a person here that respects my pronouns and respects how I identify myself and not just how I look. So that I think is the first thing. And I think that like in my office, I chose to put like an LGBTQ flag to show that if someone goes into my office, they can know that this place is supportive and they can be whoever they are. And I think just ask questions, but try to like stay polite. Don't ask questions that you won't ask another person who is not trans. And I think that's all. Just talk and like have a conversation and respectful conversation.
And I think on another level, the one thing I always say that I learned from the families is that with love and support, you know, those kids are just shine. And I think that's true, obviously, for, you know, GLBTQ plus, but also to any other problems and challenges that children and youth are going through. You know, if the parents are supportive and there for them, you know, and I think that's one thing I learned, you know, this unconditional love from those families. And from the children, a lot of time, you know, how they're so brave to be who they are, and you know, with all the challenges. And I think that I personally learned so much from them, because how many times I hide and not comfortable with certain things. So that's also for, you know, thinking of the straight and other people, because I think it's true for everyone. And I just want to add one more thing, that a lot of time people ask me, you know, where are they now? And that's also something that I'm very proud of in Israel, is that actually, you know, Noam is in the army. And you know, the Israeli army is drafting transgender. I mean, it's not always easy. I mean, it's easy, but it's not always smooth, you know, because it's not just the army, it's often the people who are there, and it's beyond the army. But I think that that's also something that is more progressive than in many other countries, I believe, also including the US.
Yeah, you know, I'm a proud American. You know, Zionism comes to me with much more complications than being an American. I don't have to refine the modify. What does it mean for me to be an American? Where the Israel piece, we don't have ever enough time to talk about. And perhaps the thing that I'm most ashamed of has been this current administration's posture towards the trans community, particularly in the military. And they estimate there's approximately 15,000 trans service people in the United States Armed Forces who are willing to die, right, for this country and for those who hate them. And I think Israel has modeled, I'm friends with Ofer Erez, who was, I think, the first out trans person in the Israeli army. And, you know, I understand there's always space between the intention and the impact, but even being very public about the intentionality of we want complete trans inclusivity is a huge step. because I think in America it's inverted. That here you have people who love folks with trans experience, but then you have this kind of declared hatreds and transphobia in different places. There seems to be often a desire for people who know who they are to want the world to know that, in order to be able to interface with them in a way that sees them for who they are, right? The Haredi community wears certain clothes that you know, I'm a Haredi. And right, do you feel like there might be a time where those types of external manifestations of who we are internally will become less significant, and that people will be able to see people just more as humans, as opposed to the way in which they identify in different spaces? One of the things that kind of is highlighted in the film, and that's how the film ends, is with the identity of a person in all of these kind of subsets, and then being transgender. Do you feel like that focus on being transgender at some point will become less pronounced as the world comes to recognize the vast expanse of different types of experiences?
Well, I think that, like, for me, it is easier because I don't have like the appearance of a trans man. When I go out on the street, people don't know that I'm trans. So I have it easier, and I don't have to like face the hatred that some people have to face. But I have to think every time about the people that can't do the same thing. They can't go out on the street without being a mockery, or like having to face so many judgmental people staring at them, or like saying mean things. And like I get to do that, but I think that appearance have to do to be considered when we're talking about identities, because some people can't hide their identity, and we need to take care of these people too.
And I also want to say that, that there are a lot of families who are not accepting, and it's not always, the way we see in film, though. So I think, that's also, there is also a road there. And as Noam said, early in our conversation, I think partially is to kind of be informed and to understand what it means, and that it can happen everywhere. And I think that when we started the project, the goal was to film people, not necessarily in Tel Aviv, but all over the country, but to show, Noam and his family, they didn't even know what trans is. Nobody planned to be a transgender. It's not a choice. It's beyond you. Nobody wakes up in the morning and say, you know what, I want to be a trans. It doesn't work like that. It's like you explained before, it's some kind of an internal process that happens, and Noam didn't even know what transgender is. So I think it's something that happens, and it's existing, and it's important that people are aware and understand and see. And I think that was, part of the main goal for me and for everybody else who helped me make this film.
It's really beautiful. Again, it was deeply inspirational to me. I cried many times. It's hard. I mean, the struggles that people have are real. No one's life is ever hypothetical. And I did learn, I watched it obviously in the Hebrew, and I learned, I didn't realize that the word for model is dugma. Dugma is an example, right? And an example is a model, but I didn't realize that the modern Hebrew word for model is dugma. And you are actually an amazing model, right, for the universe, to really show what does it look like to be true to oneself, to be true to one's creator and community, and to be able to have the courage to be honest. And to really, right now, unfortunately, God is in the closet, right? We've forced God to be very hidden right now, unfortunately. So I just want to thank you for being a dugma. Thank you for being a model for all of this. Well, this was a distinct honor and pleasure, and thank you so much for being in conversation. And I hope Mir Tashem soon we'll be able to meet in person, on happy occasions when it's safe.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you to the audience to join us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. All right, take care, friends. Be well.
Thanks.